This show, like all shows on Blogging Heads TV and Mini of Life TV, is produced by the Non-Zero Foundation. Please consider supporting us financially at patreon.com/nonzerofoundation. Thanks.
Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody. Bill, you have for those who are not watching, a picturesque background there.
If you were here, it's not that exciting, but I'm on my little front porch. I got my red maple behind me. I have tapped that maple. I have made maple syrup from that maple. But the kids are inside playing video games, and so I'm relegated to the porch.
Well, it looks nice, and we are all, to a certain extent, servants to our children, and so it is good to be back with you as always. We should plug real quick. You never know; these things could fall apart, Bill. But we've got a couple special guests lined up for our DM Zooms. I mean, I guess we'll call it a DM Zoom.
Yeah.
We're going to have, because the DM Zoom could be just when you and I do the Zoom, but we're going to talk this week, I guess, with Steve Kornacki.
Very exciting.
Of MSNBC. And I want to see your nerddom up against his. Because I think I'm just going to sit back and watch.
Well, I like Steve a lot, and I respect his nerddom immensely. I've had the honor of I was on his weekend show several times. And he did, when I had my new Books and Politics podcast, he came on to talk about his Red and the Blue book. So I've had, and he's been very generous and pleasant to me on Twitter when we've gotten nerd out sometimes. So it's like 2 a.m. on an election night.
I think he's just a super decent, good, nice, smart guy overall.
Yeah. Yes.
And I love his, he's been tweeting clips from the 1988 Democratic and Republican conventions, I think, videos, I guess, because it was at this date in 1988 or something like that.
Well, what I'm super jealous, what I'm jealous about is, I mean, he has the same interest in political campaign history as I do, and I love going back into the page of history and pulling out an obscure fact on Twitter. But he has the NBC News archives. He has all that video. I can't compete with that.
And I think he has an assistant to probably pull up the video. We can ask him. Then the following week, and of course you can be part of these Zoom calls by giving us money on Patreon. The following week we're going to have our good friend Joe Trippi on the Zoom, and that'll be fun. Bill, you debated Joe several months ago, I think back in January.
It was a friendly conversation.
Well, here's the thing. You argued that Iowa doesn't matter that much anymore. He argued that it matters more than ever. I think this is my recollection. And, Bill, I think you won that, right? Last time I checked, Joe Biden's going to be the nominee. Last time I checked, Joe Biden didn't win Iowa. Do we start our conversation by reliving this?
I mean, I'm not asking you to, Matt Lewis, but if you so chose to bring that topic of conversation, I would oblige.
In fairness to Joe, he never made the contention that it's predictive.
Correct.
But I don't.
I never argued it was meaningless. I argued that it was mattering less and less. And then South Carolina mattered the most. I do think that was borne out. Now, there was a tweet last night by Alex Thompson at Politico reacting to a story that Democrats are going to revisit their whole calendar and their whole process. And he mentioned, he could see South Carolina going first now and Iowa getting bumped off. And I responded, South Carolina is already the nominee maker. I mean, it's not just 2016. They made the not just 2020, but they made the nominee in 2008, 2016, and 2020. Ever since there's been this new schedule where there's 4, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, essentially 4 primaries in 4 different regions. every time on the Democratic side, South Carolina calls the shot. They back cleanup. They're not leadoff, they back cleanup. You don't need to change that for South Carolina to have its influence.
That's a really, so for those who are not baseball aficionados, in a baseball lineup, the fourth person up at the plate is a power hitter, right? That's your best, strongest hitter that can hit a home run. It's not your leadoff. You don't lead off with your best hitter. That's your guy who could maybe get on base and set up the grand slam for the cleanup hitter, as you call it. I think this is a column. You should write this. This is a very, very good point. No need to just be, again, the argument is that demographically speaking, Iowa and New Hampshire really shouldn't be at the front of the pack. And you're saying, like, who cares? The number 4 spot is more important.
Well, it probably is a column. It's probably not a column for today, but it probably is a column down the line. And the one thing that I would say that sort of slightly contradict myself, one, being fourth has a value because the earlier contests are winnowers, and then the fourth one essentially, if not ultimately decides it, comes very close to deciding before Super Tuesday really, ends it. At least that's the way it's been. Although Super Tuesday did not really end it for Barack and Clinton in 2008. It had to go on a little bit longer before it was really mathematically clear that Obama was going to win. And 16 dragged out too, but after Super Tuesday, it was mathematically obvious that Clinton was the winner, just Bernie refuses to accept it. I do think South Carolina's import is not primarily in its placement, although that helps, but that it is a bellwether for the rest of the Deep South, which in Democratic primaries is heavily African American. And maybe there'll be a day when that vote doesn't act so monolithically, but in the recent contest it has. And so it's not just that you win South Carolina, you win South Carolina and Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi and to a lesser extent Arkansas and Tennessee and North Carolina with large margins that give you a lot of delegates. And I don't think that changes if you move the date of South Carolina.
Yeah. Now, all I can say is, just to put this in full Matt Lewis nerddom context, I'm going to name my recollection of the starting lineup of the first 4 batters in the 1983 Baltimore Orioles. As I recall, it would have been Al Bunbury, Rich Dower, Cal Ripken, Eddie Murray. Now, last time I checked, Al Bunbury's not in the Hall of Fame.
Should be.
But I think Eddie Murray's probably gone, and Cal Ripken's definitely there. So, is Eddie Murray in the Hall of Fame? He might already be. I hope he's an Oriole. If he's in there, I hope he won as an Oriole. But
who else did he play for?
I think he played for the Dodgers also. Anyway, number 4 is more important than number 1.
Hey, but leadoff hitters matter, though, man. I'm surprised you're being so disparaging to an important leadoff hitter. Like, there's an argument. I'm just tired of you injecting your masculine sports into every analogy. But okay, there is an argument that Iowa and New Hampshire are bad leadoff hitters. That they have not justified their presence in the lineup. But I do think you want. I think the regional construct is good. I think it's good to have different parts of the country having a chance to weigh in before Super Tuesday. I think the Iowa caucus. I think the caucus is dead.
Yeah.
And I am a traditionalist, so it makes me a little sad. But I do think it had gotten too big. Too many people participate for the caucus system to make any more sense.
I guess the way to judge it would be, look, on the Republican side, we got Trump, and that's a problem. I don't think we can blame Iowa and New Hampshire for that, but we got Trump.
Iowa voted for Cruz.
Right. So you could say obviously there's a problem, but it's not Iowa. On the Democratic side, was there a better candidate? Didn't the better candidate always make it? Like, is there an example of the better candidate in recent history not emerging as the nominee? The better general election candidate,
I mean, obviously, there are plenty of Bernie would have won people out of 2016, so it's not something you can adjudicate so cleanly. And not everyone loves the fact that John Kerry, ran the table in 2004. They thought Dean got a raw deal.
But Bernie would have done worse if black voters had more of a say, right? I mean.
Well, right. I mean, Bernie wasn't going to get that nomination because he didn't have enough appeal there. And arguably the same is true for Dean. I mean, Dean never really got tested on that score because Kerry knocked him out of the box before they got the South. Maybe John Edwards would have done better if Kerry hadn't had such a big head of steam. But these are a lot of but that was before the new calendar. That was before the Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina calendar. But Iowa and New Hampshire are such narrow slices of the Democratic electorate. It's a very upper-educated white constituency in those two states. Now, maybe it makes sense for one state to be like that, but I think two in a row is probably too.
But I think we're getting away from the point of this, which is that the Joe Trippi will be on the Zoom, and we'll start off by reminding him of the last time we talked, and it's not going to go well for Joe. Initially. By the way, Joe Trippi, huge Oriole fan, I'll just hasten to say, while we're on the topic. So,
one more sports point before we get down to real business here. I keep forgetting to mention this on past shows. Aussie Rules Football has been back. They came back from coronavirus quarantine. They've been going for the last few weeks. No fans, but they are playing, and my Kangaroos are doing very poorly. But for those sort of craving for some sports activity, you could, pay for your Watch AFL service and get some games in.
Yeah, and let me also say, some of you may know that my Little League team was off for 2 weeks due to a COVID scare. We are back. Game tomorrow night. Also, no fans, but that's got nothing to do with the rules. We just have no fans. But anyway, all is right with the world, and baseball will be back in business. So this is good.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. So let's talk a little Veep to start.
Okay.
Biden,
I love that show, man.
It is a great show.
Huge Julia Louis-Dreyfus fan.
Biden said on Joy Reid's new show, he was asked if he was committed to picking a black woman. He wouldn't commit to picking a black woman, but then went on to say that he had 4 black women in contention. And it just seems to me, if you say things like that, and then you don't pick a black woman, it's not going to look so good. I mean, in one sense, he's saying, look, I can't make a commitment here. I'm giving them my due diligence. So, on paper, he has the out of saying, look, I just think Tammy Duckworth made the most sense. I think Elizabeth Warren made the most sense, or Tammy Baldwin or Gretchen Whitmer or whatever. But it just seems like it just adds to the expectation level. You have 4, and you're telling me you can't find one of those 4 who is sufficiently qualified?
And by the way, let me say, I think that Joanne Reid, I applaud her for proving that the cancel culture doesn't take everybody down, because clearly you can say horrible things about gays or other groups and get your own show. So God bless America, land of reinvention.
Well, there's a column or discussion to have about who gets canceled and who doesn't, because it is very inconsistent.
Who lives, who dies, who tells your story. That's
right.
What it is.
But do you agree that now that Biden can't pick someone who's not black, but he has made it a lot harder if he is trying to keep that door open, and maybe he isn't, a lot harder for him to do so now because of what he has said and sort of the general expectation that people have had, particularly after the George Floyd protests?
I think that Biden's conundrum is lessened by virtue of the fact that I think you and I would agree that Kamala Harris is probably the best pick and probably the most likely pick. And so if he was leaning toward Amy Klobuchar and this happened, I think it would put him in a difficult position. But I think that he will end up picking Kamala, and therefore I don't think this is as dangerous as it might be.
Well, I think it's dangerous. I mean, I still would think that Duckworth and Whitmer and Baldwin and Warren are long shots here. So I actually more inclined to think Biden saying that is in part because he is probably leaning that way anyway, not that he is trying to come up with an escape route and is doing it in a bad way.
Yeah.
But you're not seeing a lot of Kamala commentary. We're still sort of in this let's be creative in our hot takes phase. And you're seeing Karen Bass trial balloons and not as much Val Demings lately. There was that Val Demings piece in Politico about the police brutality cases that happened on her watch when she was Orlando police chief. And I haven't seen as much about Val Demings since that. She hasn't put herself out there a lot. I haven't seen her do a big interview where she tries to explain those things. It's not to say that she is out of the running, or maybe she's having a private conversation with Biden. Biden says, hey, you answered it well enough for me. I think we can go forward. But it does seem like in the public conversation, she's faded some. And there was an Atlantic piece arguing that Bass was rising on the premise that she likely doesn't want to run for president herself, and Biden doesn't want to be overshadowed, perhaps, and might be inclined to not essentially slot someone in for 2024 or even 2028 and let the primary process play out who the next nominee is. I gotta say, I don't think that logic clicks with me. I mean, obviously I'm not a Biden mind reader. I just, don't think Biden is worried about being overshadowed. He doesn't seem to have that kind of an ego. He's often talked very openly about being a bridge to the next generation, which is not the kind of thing that a self-absorbed person would do. And I think as far as like...
Could you imagine Trump? Imagine Trump saying that?
Right. That just would never, ever happen. And I also think that the expectation of the base, the desire, to the extent that there is a desire for a black woman or a woman of color, is so that person is slotted to be the next nominee. It is to help that person not get chewed up in a fractious primary. It's recognizing this is a tough barrier, and maybe somebody needs that 4 to 8 years of familiarity with the public to make it easier. Not to say that it would be an unfair advantage, but vice presidents get an advantage because they are tapped as the next most qualified person. They're in the spotlight. They're taking on tasks. And then they become deserving of the promotion. So if you're picking somebody, one last point I always want to say: if you're picking somebody who is implicitly not being up for promotion, what are you saying about that person? Are you saying this person is not really the most qualified person? Is this person token window dressing? That might be an awkward conversation to have.
Well, look, I think even if you take the identity politics aspect out of it, the Democratic Party and I think the Republican Party, let's go to the Republican Party. They could have benefited from having a next in line. That, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I guess Jeb got that mantle, but it wasn't. For a variety of reasons, it wasn't the right.
But Cheney was not queued up. Cheney was there to not be an ambitious person who wanted the job for himself, and so you had two primaries that followed that were very chaotic.
Exactly. You know, there's this a lesson in leadership that says without a successor, there is no success. And so even if you take the idea of elevating a, woman of color to the heir apparent role and just say somebody elevating a person, a Democrat I think that there is value in doing that, especially when you have a nominee that is as old as Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean that's the extra factor here. This is not your average VP choice. I mean, a lot of times you can pick a VP choice who is a wallflower, who's meant to be a non-factor, straight, do no harm, and then get back to debating top of the ticket. But this is going to be widely seen as a potential president in perhaps 4 years. That's going to bring extra levels of scrutiny and expectation. Which is why I do think, if you're looking at a Val Demings, I don't think it's sufficient to ignore the Politico piece about police brutality and hope it goes away. You're going to get asked those questions. So you might as well ask them right now, answer them right now, and show you can handle it and handle that level of scrutiny. You want a VP that can really hit the ground running, that people look at as a potential president. Whereas past VPs, you might not worry about that sort of thing. Bush could get away with Dan Quayle, Bush Sr., because no one was worried that Bush Sr. was going to die in 4 years. This is different, and it's one of the reasons why I think your long shot trial balloons, Bass, Demings, Susan Rice, etc. I don't think they don't make me move off of Kamala Harris, because one of the things in her advantages beyond being a statewide elected official and having that on her resume is that she's been through this grind.
Yeah,
she is prepared for the job of president in a performative way and in a substantive way, and that helps with that rollout when there is a heightened level of scrutiny.
Running for president helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, Sarah Palin, much has been said. I've talked and written a lot about Sarah Palin. But in a way, it was unfair being thrust into the spotlight the way that she was, thrown in the deep end. And being mayor of Wasilla and Governor of Alaska certainly didn't prepare her. Not only substantively, it clearly didn't prepare her substantively, but also for the media circus, that she had to endure. And had she run for president herself, unsuccessfully in a primary, she would have done the rounds a little bit. She would have been on Meet the Press and This Week, and she would have probably had to bone up on some of the issues like organically over the course of a year rather than over the course of a month. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot to be said for that process of running for president.
And Biden.
Now you've made a point, Bill, that these running mate options are interestingly pretty moderate, though, which I think is something that not a lot of other people are picking up on. These are not left-wing folks exactly.
I mean, the only real, populist progressive in the mix is Warren, who is not black, who is white. To a lesser extent, Tammy Baldwin is considered an economic populist.
Native American. Okay.
Even she has given up on that. So I will not give her that additional identifier. It's not just that the other candidates, the women of color candidates, are not especially hard left. They've all had tangles with the left to some degree. I mean, there are folks on the left that were really anti-Kamala in the primary because of her prosecutorial record. When Val Demings ran for the House, she was attacked on her left for the police brutality cases, for taking special interest money. There were several that were angry that the DCCC was favoring her and gave her a slot at the DNC convention in 2016. There were even times when her events were what's the word when you bust into an event that you're not invited to. The candidates would do that and make a bit of a scene. Also, Tammy Duckworth had a tough primary in 2006 for the House, where Rahm Emanuel had handpicked Tammy as the more moderate candidate, and a single-payer candidate ran on her left, and that was a really bitter primary. the governor of New Mexico, who's Hispanic, Lujan Grisham. She had also a tough primary where someone on her left. In Ryan Grimm's book, We've Got People, he accused Lujan Grisham of playing a race card against him because while they're both Hispanic, she is of Spanish descent and he is of Mexican descent, and he had a DUI, and she ran attack ads about that, and he was arguing that she was saying I was the browner candidate by doing that. And Karen Bass hasn't had a bit of a high-profile spat, but in the past month, she said that defund the police was possibly the worst slogan ever. Then she apologized for that. She didn't want to malign activists. And then a week later, she did an interview with the Politico where she said that, it's a difference between being a legislator and an activist on police reform. There's a difference between making a point and making a difference. So she's definitely was leaning into her pragmatist cred and separating herself from the activists. And Susan Rice, the anti-war folks have called her a militarist. She said nice things about Colin Powell's WMD presentation in 2003, even though she wasn't agitating for war. She was giving that credence at a time when folks on the left weren't. And she was on the interventionist side in Libya, in the Obama administration. Some folks have criticized her support for certain African strongmen. So all these folks are not beloved by the activist left. Now, of course, they don't love Biden either. And Biden's still winning by 8, 9, 10 points. And so Biden could well say, I don't care. I think you guys are going to stick with me regardless. But it's interesting that there are folks on the left, on the capital left, who would, in an ideal world, want both a woman of color and a populist progressive, and they're not going to get both. Someone's going to be disappointed in this process.
Is there somebody in that Venn diagram? Is there I guess, AOC
she's not old enough.
Is going to be that person.
But she's not old enough.
But is there
yet.
somebody not old enough now?
I mean, the person who would theoretically be that candidate is Barbara Lee, Congresswoman from California, who the lone vote against, the authorization of military force going into Afghanistan, against the Patriot Act. But she's not in the mix. And maybe Stacey Abrams might be that person. Although maybe the left has things that they don't like about her if they dug in deeper. I'm not sure. But again, she's not clearly on the short list at this point. What you're seeing is you see some more younger, hard left African American activists get behind Warren. There was an op-ed in the Washington Post recently that Warren would be the best choice for Black lives. She has policies to that end. And if she did get picked, that would be the argument to be made to argue that this is a pick that is designed to help the lot of African Americans. But my guess is that he is going to go in a more moderate direction, and probably in a black direction, and probably that's Kamala Harris.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned in this discussion of vice presidents, you invoked the name Dick Cheney. So I think we should talk about his daughter, Liz.
Yes.
Who is, I think a player in the ongoing Republican Civil War, we could say.
So what
was your take on this?
Well, just to catch people up if they don't know, there was a meeting yesterday of the Republican caucus, House Republican caucus, where she got into a scrap with Jim Jordan. They were complaining that she was undercutting Trump. She's been talking about respecting Fauci. She tweeted a photo of Dick Cheney wearing a mask, saying real men wear masks. Am I losing you again, Matt?
I'm back.
You're back? Okay.
We're having, for those viewing at home, we're having technical difficulty. We're having some connectivity issues today.
I know.
It's not good.
And
every time I say the name Cheney, something bad happens.
The deep state at work. Cheney shot back that, let's see how much of a team player Jim Jordan is if Biden wins. and the Freedom Caucus is asked to stay in line because the Freedom Caucus often did not stay in line in the Obama years. So I guess the question,
and she was, I don't know if you mentioned this part, but she was also attacked for her kind words about Dr. Fauci.
Right. I mean, all this is seen as her not being a team player in the context of Trump's reelection. My question to you, Matt, is: does Liz Cheney have a patch of turf to stand on? Is she representing a big enough constituency in the party that she is able to carve out a place where, in a post-Trump GOP, she would have significant influence, or is she a dying sliver of the party that could get ushered out in some kind of purge if Trump wins or loses?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And I saw there was a former Paul Ryan staffer who says that what's at play here with Liz Cheney is that people are starting to get the message that Donald Trump is probably going to lose, and that, they don't like the future that she has envisioned or that she could help lead in a post-Trump world. So I think that's the backdrop. The backdrop of this is, the fact that people are getting the message that Trump is maybe on his way out.
So, but I mean, I think that message is definitely fairly widely accepted amongst Republicans, but it seems like Republicans are reacting in different ways. You had Ted Cruz and Rand Paul complaining in a different meeting yesterday. They met with Mnuchin and Chief of Staff Mark Meadows about a stimulus package, and Cruz and Paul were complaining afterwards that the White House wants to spend too much money. And Cruz I find sort of oddly incongruous with Cruz. He was saying, hey, Biden's going to win if the economy isn't good. You should reopen the economy and not do the stimulus package, which to my mind says maybe you want to reopen the economy and do a stimulus package if that's your concern. But it seems like Cruz wants to have the moniker of being the guy true to the conservative fiscal principle, and Rand Paul to the libertarian conservative fiscal principle. So everyone's scurrying in their own way. And of course,
Ben Sass is back talking tough.
Right.
About
you also have
Trump.
this little friction going on between Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity. There was a Tucker Carlson 2024 piece that came out in Politico. Then Sean Hannity does
before Politico wrote it, Tom LoBianco at Business Insider wrote it. Then Politico published 2 hours later.
Fair enough. Although I'm not going to throw my political colleagues under the bus. I'm sure they're working on it, on their own speed and their own time. But so that got out there. And then Hannity gave some comment to a guest about running for president himself. And then last night, Tucker, shows before Sean's, Tucker ended on a diatribe about Amazon making too much money in this crisis, and then Hannity comments about the free market and, hey, if they're selling a service that people want to buy, all power to them. And Tucker gives his patented, scrunched up, eyebrows raised, deer in the headlights face. So I
think it was worse than that. No, I think it wasn't the normal perplexed look. It was more anger, I would say. I think it was
more
worse
daggers.
It wasn't. It was a look of disgust and anger, I think.
It's like Seinfeld, stink eye, evil eye.
It was rough. And, I don't think they're going to be running against each other in 2024. I don't think Sean Hannity is going to run. And I think it's 50-50 for Tucker, but maybe they will be symbolically, right? Like Hannity representing, more of a hybrid between like George Bush conservatism and Trump conservatism. But really, Hannity probably not having a deeply thought through, worldview to begin with. Whereas Tucker, I think, is a true believer in the kind of populist nationalist brand that is ascendant on the right. And I think also, he's challenging a lot of conservative conventional wisdom, as was evidence in that dispute last night. We'll call it a dispute.
So while all this, splintering is going on, we all take into account the possibility that someone named Trump runs in 2024 as well, whether it's Trump Sr. or Trump Jr.
Or
Ivanka or Laura. Who knows? Who
knows? When does Barron turn 35?
Maybe more than one. Maybe it's a family fight that gets brought into. Look, if Kanye can fight with his wife on Twitter, why can't Trump's fight with their families on Twitter? So it seems like.
But Kanye and Kim are fighting on Twitter?
Well, Kim hasn't spoken up, but Kanye had a series of 2 rounds of tweets where he's essentially accusing his wife of wanting to institutionalize him, and
imagine that,
and accusing her of mistreating the kids. So things are not quite right over there, and
imagine though if that happened in politics. That could never happen in politics, right? You could never have, Kellyanne Conway and her husband George and their daughter. You see, the daughter has now been banned from social media.
So
by mom and dad. It's a crazy world.
My point here is, I think you're heading into a post-Republican Party where you're not only having an ideological dispute about what direction the party should go in, but that might also be added to multiple personality squabbles, which have ideological elements, but also just straight up pettiness that would make things really complicated in terms of how to regroup and move forward. And now on top of all of that, you have the Lincoln Project, which we talked about on the last show. One of the Lincoln Project members, John Weaver, gave an interview with Greg Sargent at the Washington Post, where Sargent asked, hey, what are you going to do in a Biden presidency? Are you going to stay on the Democratic team or the Republican team? And he said, because they're already saying we're supporting Biden, we're supporting Republicans, we're supporting Democratic senators who are challenging Republican incumbents, because they've been with Trump and they need to be punished. And now Weaver was saying, hey, if these guys who remain in the Senate, if they obstruct Biden, if they're not going to let the country,
how dare that?
They're let the country come together and solve these big problems, we're going to punish them too.
If Biden tries to put, a pro-abortion Supreme Court justice and they try to obstruct that, because that's, maybe what you're supposed to do if you're exercise your own judgment. Or if Biden wants to raise taxes and they try to obstruct that, you're telling me this Lincoln Project group is going to stop Republicans from acting not like Trumpians, but like Reagan Republicans? Well, that's my concern. And I wrote a column touching on this at the Daily Beast. But, my concern is that Never Trump is going to become Never Republican. And the ultimate goal, which I thought of being a Never Trumper, was to restore the GOP to a more, Reaganite conservatism, that's going to be out the window. And it's going to be basically that these folks, especially the operatives, are going to become part of the left. Or at least part of the Democratic infrastructure.
It seems like, and this is just one interview, and perhaps he was not speaking for everybody. Perhaps things might change as we go forward. I don't know. But to take it all at face value, it seems like they don't want to. I think they do care about the Republican Party. I think they want the Republican Party expunged of Trumpism, but not to restore Reagan Republicanism, but to restore an Eisenhower-style Republicanism. to restore a Bob Michael Republican minority, not a Newt Gingrich Republican minority that works with Democrats, that finds common ground, that maybe sands out the Democratic rough edges, but doesn't try to undercut and make it impossible for policies to be enacted.
Well, and I mean, Weaver worked for, I believe, John Kasich, so that would make, in that regard, it would make a lot of sense. But that's not what we signed up for. I mean, I've been called a NeverTrumper.
You haven't signed up for anything. You're not even going to vote.
Well, I think my Never Trump bona fides are pretty strong. I mean, my book, Too Dumb to Fail, was probably the first book that was taking on the sort of know-nothing, anti-intellectual, anti-expertise trend in the Republican Party that led to Trump. Right before Trump, it came out in January of 2016. I've spent essentially 4 years. The vast majority of my columns in the last 4 years have been attacking Donald Trump in the hopes of returning to a Reaganite brand of conservatism. I mean, look, I don't want to go backwards, but building into the future, but with the goal of those principles, generally speaking. I mean, we're not trying to take on the Soviet Union anymore because they're not there. I realize the world changes, but I think for most of us, NeverTrumpers, it was the idea of like decimating, destroying the village to save it, decimating it, and returning to Eisenhower. That was never part of the bargain, as far as I know. At least for me, it wasn't.
Well, I just don't think there is an established bargain here. There's a splintering, and the Lincoln Project is, as I think, the most aggressive never-Trump Republican affiliated operation. Now the affiliation that has managed to build a constituency, raise money, have ads.
And a lot of it from Democrats. I mean, at least the top dollar donors.
And probably most of them.
And don't these Democrats have what is their agenda? I mean, if I'm a top Democrat donor and I make common cause, even temporarily with a group like this, is my goal for them to fix the Republican Party? Because I believe that a strong two-party system is vital for a flourishing democracy, and to restore the Republican Party so that the Republican Party can win elections again and be a strong, serious, competent, Republican Party? Or is my goal to destroy the Republican Party? I suspect it's the latter.
Well, I think there's division on the left on this. There are definitely folks on the left who are very wary of the Lincoln Project, who think that if they have a disproportionate amount of influence over Biden because they can say, hey, we spent all this money on you, we know where the middle of the country is, we have better political antenna than the squad does. If you go single payer, if you go reparations, if you go whole hog Green New Deal, federal job guarantee, we're out. We can't raise money and help you if you do that stuff. That's the kind of thing that makes the left very, very nervous. So
do we think that they would? I'm skeptical of the idea that they're going to walk away from this because they disagree, because the Democratic Party goes too far to the left. That's where I'm at now. That's my level of concern.
I mean, there'll probably be some point in time, I don't know if it's in the next 4 years or later, where the Democrats do something that Lincoln Project doesn't like, and Lincoln Project says this is a bridge too far for me. But Biden being a congenital moderate is probably not going to rush to that place. But they are potentially creating a power base for themselves where they make both left and right uneasy. And I don't know how much they care about policy, but they may try to, it's either, they're sort of saying we're either going to keep the Democratic Party rooted in moderate centrist principles, or we're going to get the Republican Party off of the mat and get them back into the middle. And if so, we'll come back. I can't know, but it's a different it's a different lane they're carving for themselves than I think the Bill Kristol lane. Bill Kristol has his own group. That's not the Lincoln Project. It's like Republicans against Trump or something like that. Yeah. Kristol's a pretty...
Well, I just say, from a messaging standpoint, there's a key difference between the two groups, okay? Remember how I think it was 2 weeks ago, maybe it was last week, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I told you how I showed my mom that Lincoln Project ad that I really liked, and it actually turned her off.
Right. Too much Obama, too much Clinton.
Right. I think the Bill Kristol ads, and I haven't tested this on my mom, but I suspect that they would play much better with someone like my mom, because they're actually, interviewing Republicans who don't want to leave the Republican Party, who don't want to vanquish the Republican Party, and the message is like Trump co-opted this party, or he's a bad guy. Let's get back to where we were. I think that's a much more compelling argument if your goal is to win over people like my mom. Now, if your goal is to raise money and get attention from the media, maybe there's a different or in fairness to the Lincoln Project, or if your goal is to drive Trump crazy by virtue of psychological warfare, and I do think that's one of their deliverables here, then I think you do what the Lincoln Project is doing.
Yeah, but Kristol has long-standing policy interests, especially on foreign policy. And I am sure he would love to be able to say to Joe Biden, we helped you get elected. Hear me out on what you should do vis-a-vis Iran, or vis-a-vis Russia, or vis-a-vis North Korea, or Saudi Arabia, or what have you. I don't really know if Rick Wilson and John Weaver have that same depth of policy interest. Maybe they do. Maybe that hasn't been what they're known for. So I just think it creates a wild card situation where Weaver has showed a little bit of a hand in the Greg Sargent interview, but you don't really know exactly what their end game is. Well, I feel like I got a better sense what I do with Kristol.
Look, Kristol may see this differently. Kristol's dad, I believe, was one of the neocons who was a Democrat who became a Republican and ended up having a lot of influence over the Republican Party, right? And so it is possible that there's a reordering and that the coalitions change and that intellectuals and influencers can impact parties. But I'm skeptical. I think that this is sort of the way that Republicans nominate Supreme Court justices, who always evolve, but Democrat Supreme Court justices never evolve. Maybe you can infiltrate the Republican Party and influence that. I don't know. I'm highly skeptical of the idea that NeverTrumpers can have any purchase, any cachet, any influence within the Democratic Party. If that were to happen, I would love it. And if they could moderate the Democratic Party and make it possible that you could be a pro-life Democrat who also cares about immigrants and also, I think that would be amazing. I am highly skeptical of that possibility. I just think that the left is too entrenched. I think that the squad and all the energy and the power and the money is I just don't think it's possible that NeverTrumpers could do that. But if they do it, I would applaud them if they did it. I just don't think they can.
Well, it's not just them. Keep in mind that you have you already have a slew of Democrats that won House races in 2018 who are moderate, who Trump won districts that way. You don't, the hard left can't. The AOCs, you did not come from those districts. Even Katie Porter, who's a big star on the left now, she flipped a district, but it was a Clinton won district. The ones that flipped the Trump won districts were more moderate. The whole slate of Senate candidates this time around who could possibly flip Montana or Kansas or Iowa or Georgia, these are all moderates. So it's not just Lincoln Project. They're going to have other Democrats to work with to say, look, you have successfully brought over center-right suburban voters into this party. And so the Lincoln Project can say it's not just that we ran ads, it's that you have a faction of your big tent here that's very critical to your majorities, and you should be very wary about listening to the AOCs because they're not the ones who brought you to the dance. I've heard nothing from
the Lincoln Project or the NeverTrumpers saying that this is what they want, that they want to have influence in the Democratic Party and that they want to help block.
Beyond this one interview, I don't know. I don't know what they really want.
But I have heard them say that they want to block the Republicans from blocking Joe Biden's agenda. And so I may have to, can you hear the yelling in the background?
Very faintly.
It's not just you.
Very faintly. If you didn't call attention to it, I would have thought it was just kids having a fun-filled summertime.
It's just the TV. Don't mind the screaming and the gunshots in the background. It's just the TV. What I have heard is people saying that they, the NeverTrumpers, the Lincoln Project folks, Weaver to be specific, saying that if Republicans try to stymie Biden's agenda, that they will, intervene. And so I wrote a piece at the Daily Beast saying, look, it's one thing to take out Trump. He's obviously egregious. And I understand the urge to try to take out the cowards who enabled him. But do we really, if you're a conservative, if you're a Reagan conservative, do you really want to hand all the levers of power to the Democratic Party and give them undivided government and have this backlash? And so it might be good to have some Republicans in there in case there's a Supreme Court nomination, in case they want to raise taxes or whatever. And Sherry Jacobus, who is a never-Trump Republican strategist, I think she used to be at CNN years ago, said on Twitter, she tweeted me, "Purge them from the country. Make them flee to the jungles of Argentina like the Nazis did after World War II." And the comments are not people saying that that's a bit much. It's, yeah, this is the mentality, Bill. I think it's scary. And I think this speaks to these never-Trumpers are saying things like Donald Trump. Some of the stuff Rick Wilson tweets and others, maybe it was Weaver, I saw somebody else. It could be Donald Trump tweeting these things. And so I think one of the things here is that, going back to Burke, the revolutionaries want to burn everything down and start over. And conservatives say, well, let's slow your roll a little bit here. There's some bad things. Let's try to reform. Let's not burn everything down and think we can start over. And I think that's actually part of the argument here is whether you believe that you have to burn down the party and, put salt in the ground and wait a generation or two or whether it's possible to change the leader, change some of the incentives. And that's a big debate.
I'm running very low on laptop battery, so I can't go on for much longer. I think there's a potential sweet spot here. 'Cause I don't think that the Lincoln Project is saying you have to rubber stamp everything Joe Biden wants and be bystanders. But there's difference between being principled opposition and being obstructionists. If they want to have their
that's not what they said. Mm-hmm. That's maybe it's just sometimes people don't eloquently express their views in an interview, but that's not exactly what I read. Mm-hmm. But maybe there's more.
I think we just need to see what happens when it happens. I mean, I don't think you can take enough from the interview to know exactly what they're going to do in every individual circumstance. Like what gets proposed from Biden and how Republicans react precisely is going to depend on what they actually do at the given time. And because we don't know a whole lot about, Wilson and Weaver et al., what their really underlying agenda is, it's hard to really game it out because it could go in a lot of different directions.
I just think, and Henry Olsen at the Washington Post has written about this as well. It's one thing to say conservatism is a serious and good philosophy and worldview that I believe in. What Donald Trump has done is perverted, is co-opted. It was a hostile takeover. We need to get back to what we believe in. That's one thing. And if you believe that, you can say, And therefore, I believe we have to get rid of Trump, okay? That's one thing. And it may be hard for Republicans to do that, but that's like one step. And it takes a lot of courage and bravery to do that. But to say, you know, we need to like not only back Joe Biden, but give the Democrats the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And oh, by the way, if you try to stop him from enacting his liberal agenda, we're going to go after you with the name Lincoln under the guise of being the arbiters of true republicanism, true conservatism. That's a different step. It
is. And we'll see if Republicans take that threat seriously and consider how they position themselves versus Biden in that circumstance. But I need to stop because I think the battery's going to die.
All right, I have more to say, but I will stop for the sake of batteries. Check us out again. Kornacki coming up Friday on the DM Zoom.
So join us on Patreon if you want to be a part of that.
Yeah, and we'll see you back here. If you're not there, we'll see you back here in the DMZ next week. I think. Are you going to be on assignment?
No.
Assignment?
It can be a working vacay. I'll talk to you next week.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Bill.